Chapter 1. The Masked Ball at Elder Manor. Elder Manor stood like a grand sentinel among the fog-kissed hills of Kent, its stone walls stretching beyond the eye's reach, adorned with ivy that curled like ancient script along its facade. There was, from the very first glance, a hushed reverence about the estate, an unspoken acknowledgment of the secrets it had hoarded for centuries. Tonight, its imposing halls gleamed with the glow of 1,000 candles, for the annual masquerade had commenced. Nobles in shimmering masks and embroidered coats drifted through the ballroom, their laughter gliding on the air like wraiths. Nothing seemed out of place, until it suddenly was. At the heart of this gathering, one figure observed with watchful precision. Miss Jane Marple, petite and unassuming in her embroidered shawl, her eyes the pale blue of frost, and yet sharp enough to slice through the thickest facade. She accepted a crystal flute of champagne, politely declining the chatter of fawning guests, while her gaze traced every movement with the subtlety of a cat stalking a mouse. For she knew well that Elder Manor had a reputation for more than lavish feasts and waltzes. It bore the stain of an ancient rumor, whispered tales of a family curse tied to an heirloom so coveted it had once prompted betrayal and violent reaction. Among the masked revelers was one who did not belong, or rather, one who belonged entirely too much. Princess Seraphina, the sole heir to a fractured royal line, moving unnoticed through the crowd beneath the guise of a simple maid. Her plain attire belied the elegance in her bearing, each step measured, each glance cautious. Why would a royal risk such exposure, one might wonder? It was a question Miss Marple intended to answer before the final hour of this night. A low murmur rose as the orchestra struck a haunting waltz, the notes curling through the marble arches like a cold breeze, and guests swayed in hypnotic rhythm. Yet for all the sparkle of jewels and the sweep of silken gowns, the eyes of the assembled seemed drawn, one by one, to the massive oil painting dominating the far wall. This portrait, depicting Elder Manor's original mistress, Lady Evelina, famed for a scandal involving poison, a false alibi, and a vanished heirloom, held an unsettling quality. The tilt of the lady's head appeared to shift ever so slightly when no one was looking, her painted eyes glinting with a cryptic amusement that went unspoken. Miss Marple stood at the ballroom's edge, her senses alert to each whispered conversation, each glance exchanged between guests cloaked in their elaborate masks. She noted the tension woven into every polite greeting, the forced levity of jokes told too loudly. Her practiced ear caught murmurs of an affair that had ended abruptly, a diary found and hastily burned, and a telegram that arrived days before, its contents concealed from all but Lady Ashcroft herself, hostess of this grand affair. These fragments formed a tapestry of motive and deception, threads Miss Marple knew she must follow before the night slipped through her fingers. It was then, just as the clock chimed the quarter hour, that something shifted in the shadows near the grand staircase. A tall, masked figure stood utterly still, the cut of their midnight blue cloak sharp as a blade, their mask an ivory visage without expression. Their gaze, if eyes hid behind that porcelain facade at all, was fixed solely on the disguised princess, who stiffened as if sensing the weight of an unspoken threat. And in that moment, Miss Marple felt the first true breath of danger stir the air, like the softest rustle of silk before a storm. My friends, if your mind turns as keenly as mine upon these matters, you might already suspect there are layers yet unpeeled at Elder Manor. For every clue uncovered brings us closer to the truth, but also deeper into a labyrinth from which some may never escape. I shall guide you through each shadowed corridor, each hushed confession, until the final twist reveals itself at the hour most unexpected. But first, I invite you, most respectfully, to subscribe to this channel, so you shall never miss the revelations that await in the dark corners of our story. For what we begin tonight at Elder Manor will lead to discoveries most murderous in implication and delicious in detail. Now, shall we continue? Have you ever sensed it, Amos? That hush which falls not when the music ends, But when every soul in the room realizes they are no longer alone with each other, but in the presence of something unspoken? For as the waltz soared to its delicate crescendo, the masked guests of Elder Manor found their steps slowing, their laughter thinning, until a tense silence blanketed the ballroom like heavy velvet. It was then a single, unmistakable sound carried across the room, the echo of footsteps descending the grand staircase, deliberate, unhurried, each step punctuated as if the figure took a certain pleasure in prolonging the suspense. Miss Marple shifted to observe the source. There emerged the masked figure, tall and commanding, moving as though he owned the very stones of the manor. He paused at the base of the stairs, head tilting as though listening to something only he could hear, the softest whisper, perhaps, drifting from the shadows above. The princess, still concealed as a maid, stood only feet away, her posture poised yet betraying the faintest tremor. The masked man's head turned toward her with glacial precision. Nothing in the candlelit hall flickered, yet the air itself seemed to recoil as his eyes, hidden yet undeniable, met hers. Meanwhile, Lady Ashcroft's lips parted in a tight smile, but her eyes betrayed a flicker of concern as she scanned the guests, as though counting them, or perhaps confirming who had arrived and who had vanished. For there were already hushed mentions of a missing footman, seen hours earlier, but now as absent as the stars behind the manor's rolling fog. Miss Marple's mind worked quietly, arranging pieces like a puzzle, a telegram that never arrived at its stated destination, a red herring involving a rumored affair between the princess's mother and Lord Percival, giving every noble gathered a motive deeper than simple jealousy, and the heirloom, yes, the ancient diamond pendant, once gifted to Elder Manor's matriarch by the crown itself, an object whispered to carry a legacy of betrayal and revenge. As dancers tried to resume their waltz, the orchestra's strings sounded faintly off-key, bow strokes uneven, as if the musicians felt the same tightness gripping every guest's chest. Shadows lengthened along the ballroom walls, the flickering sconces painting figures which shifted in impossible ways. One moment dancing couples, the next a procession of faceless watchers. The princess moved with measured grace toward the refreshment table, feigning indifference, yet each of her glances revealed a mind racing with cryptic thoughts. Miss Marple, noting the princess's gaze flicking repeatedly to the library doors, filed away the detail with quiet satisfaction. She had uncovered many secrets in her time, but few as entangled with old curses, unsolved scandals, and dangerous inheritance as those lurking within Elder Manor's walls tonight. Suddenly, a sharp crack split the strained quiet, a crystal goblet shattering on the marble floor. Gasps fluttered through the hall. A hush fell again, thicker than before. For within the shards glinted not only wine but a small piece of paper, damp yet unmistakable, a folded scrap marked with a name, a clue that could unravel every alibi crafted this evening. And though none spoke, every eye in the ballroom darted, hungry for what was written, fearful of who would claim it. Yet before a single hand could reach it, a servant, his expression blank as a mask, swept the shards into a silver pan, disappearing into the corridor beyond the ballroom's arches. What did he see? What did he know? The question coiled in every mind like a living thing. Nothing, Miss Marple reflected, is ever so simple as it first appears. Each facade conceals layers of deception, and each motive, once unmasked, reveals yet deeper shadows. But for now, one truth was certain. The princess's secrets had begun to slip beyond her grasp, and Elder Manor itself felt alive, as though remembering every betrayal that had ever unfolded beneath its roof. What clue would emerge next? Whose mask would slip first? And what secrets exposed might ignite a brutal rage before the final hour arrives? We must watch carefully, for the night has only just begun. Have you ever witnessed a moment so heavy with expectation that the mere rustle of silk seems to thunder like a storm? For it was in the wake of that shattered goblet, that hushed, quivering instant, when every gaze at Elder Manor sharpened to a single point, The princess, masked in the garb of a maid, standing frozen beside the grand fireplace, her eyes fixed upon the doors of the library. Yet it was not only the princess who felt the gravity of that moment. Miss Marple's mind ticked like a clock, each second revealing new layers of motive and deception. She noted the subtle, sideways glances exchanged between Lady Ashcroft and a rotund baron with a reputation for scandal, the careful positioning of feet, ever so slightly retreating from the princess's orbit as though fearing contagion from her secrets. Outside the towering windows, fog pressed against the panes, a dense, shifting curtain that transformed the world beyond into a blank, suffocating void. From somewhere deep within the manor came the distant chime of a clock, tolling the hour in sonorous, deliberate notes that lingered like a funeral hymn. The masked figure, the one whose steps had earlier echoed across the marble, reappeared near the edge of the ballroom, as if materializing from the shadows themselves. His movements bore the patience of a predator circling prey. Each turn of his head, each slow drift of his gloved hand to the hilt of his cane, radiated a quiet menace. Whispers rose like steam among the guests. Had this man been invited? Did he come bearing a cryptic confession or a claim to a legacy long thought lost? Or was his presence a carefully placed red herring meant to cloud every suspect's alibi? A hush fell once more as the orchestra struck a hesitant chord. The music faltered, died, then resumed in a strange, lilting rhythm that seemed to stumble over its own melody. The painting of Lady Evelina, that grand portrait observing the festivities with eyes of frozen disdain, appeared to tilt further still, its gaze following the princess as she stepped back, one trembling hand brushing the folds of her borrowed skirt. Miss Marple caught it first, a faint glint of gold peeking from beneath the princess's collar. An heirloom, unmistakably royal in craftsmanship, a piece known only to those with knowledge of the crown's most intimate affairs. It was a clue worth more than a confession, a twist certain to ignite suspicion in hearts already primed with fear and jealousy. At that precise moment, a harsh gasp tore through the crowd as the doors to the library swung inward, not pushed by any visible hand, but opening as if invited by some unspoken command. Cold air flooded the ballroom. Candles guttered in their sconces. Shadows danced wildly across every polished surface. A scent drifted out from the darkness beyond, faintly metallic like old coins or the memory of something long hidden beneath damp earth. The guests surged back, their faces pale beneath gilded masks, while Miss Marple advanced, every sense honed to the taut silence. She glimpsed the faint outline of footprints in the dustless marble, footsteps leading from the library into the heart of the ballroom, yet ending abruptly beneath the grand chandelier, as if the walker had vanished mid-stride. And then, from the depths of the library, there came a single, low whisper, so soft it might have been a trick of the mind, yet carrying a promise of secrets exposed and motives laid bare. Nothing, Miss Marple thought, could ever restore the illusion of safety to Elder Manor now, for the locked room had opened itself, the shadows had spoken, and the stage was set for a night where every whispered word, every hurried footstep, and every twisted alibi would feed a mystery so labyrinthine it might never be untangled. I urge you to stay close, my dear friends. Watch with eyes unclouded, for what follows shall test your mind, stir your curiosity, and beckon you further into the heart of a tale where the truth waits, as patient as it is perilous. And so, dear friends, as Elder Manor's shadows grow longer and secrets press ever closer to the surface, I invite you, most sincerely, to join us for every step of this unfolding mystery. If your mind, like mine, seeks each clue and twist with unquenchable curiosity, do consider subscribing now, so you shall never miss the next revelation waiting just beyond the fog. Share your theories in the comments. Who do you believe the masked figure truly is, and what legacy might be uncovered before the final hour arrives? Chapter 2. The Vanishing at Midnight. Do you know the peculiar weight of midnight in a place such as Elder Manor, MES Amos? It is not the hour alone that brings dread, but the knowledge that each stroke of the clock holds a power beyond mere time, a power that can shatter illusions, ignite violent reaction, and strip away every polite facade. For as the grand clock of Elder Manor began its 12 resonant tolls, the ballroom fell into a breathless hush. The fog outside thickened until it pressed against the windows like a living thing, while inside, candle flames trembled as though caught in a silent storm. Each toll echoed deeper than the last, rumbling through floor and bone alike, and with every note, the unease that had crept through the night hardened into something sharper. Nothing seemed out of place, until it suddenly was. At the final stroke of midnight, the ballroom lights dimmed in a brief, sputtering flicker, casting the masked crowd into an uneasy darkness. The orchestra's final note quivered and died. Then, from somewhere near the heart of the room, a scream erupted, shrill, piercing, cutting the hush like a blade. Gasps erupted. Silk skirts rustled in panicked movements. Gentlemen reached instinctively for pocket watches they would never consult. A pulse of silence followed, dense and electric. Then the doors of Elder Manor, massive oak panels banded with black iron, slammed shut with such force the chandeliers above sang with a crystalline chime. Panic rippled outward. Some guests ran to the doors, others froze mid-step, their masks slipping as terror twisted every face. Yet the doors refused to yield, locked without key or command. It was as though the manor itself had decided none would leave until secrets were paid in full. And in that stifling darkness a single clue emerged, faint yet undeniable. A thin, metallic scent wafted across the ballroom, reminiscent of old coins, a detail Miss Marple noted with icy precision. When the lights fluttered back to life, a collective gasp broke across the hall. For there, in the center of the marble floor, lay the torn mask of Lord Percival, its satin ribbons tangled as though wrenched free by brutal hands. Across its pale surface, a dark stain spread slowly, sinister in its quiet expansion. Yet of Lord Percival himself there was no sign. He had vanished, as if swallowed by the shadows themselves. Miss Marple stepped forward, every line of her gentle face set with steely resolve. Her eyes swept over the crowd, catching every nervous tick, every trembling hand. Every glance darted toward the grand staircase. Voices rose in broken chorus, some accusing, some pleading, none answering the unspoken question tearing at every mind. Where had Lord Percival gone, and who among them knew more than they dared confess? In the sudden hush, the manor's stillness pressed on every chest. Then a sound slithered into their ears, a faint drip, 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 each drop falling in the distance beyond the ballroom doors, like the ticking of a clock counting down to a revelation none were prepared to face. As guests huddled together in small, frantic knots, Miss Marple's eyes fell upon a set of wet footprints, each print glistening under the unsteady candlelight. They began near the torn mask, wound across the polished marble in a twisting path, and ended abruptly at the library's massive double doors. Doors now locked from within, despite having stood open just moments before. Nothing, she mused with cool certainty, could explain footprints that led to a locked room. Unless, of course, someone had taken great care to create a deception so convincing it might mask the most murderous of motives. And so Elder Manor stood in that midnight hour, its grand ballroom frozen in a tableau of fear, rage, and unspoken suspicions, each breath of every guest heavy with the possibility that they, too, might soon vanish without a trace. Have you ever felt it, MES Amos? That uncanny sense when every eye in a room shifts not with curiosity, but with the sharp glint of suspicion, when you realize you stand among those who would rather bury secrets than breathe truth. For as Miss Marple advanced across the ballroom floor, the silence was fractured by a single voice, a woman's quavering cry from near the grand piano, words tumbling in ragged bursts. "I saw them!" She was there, with him, arguing before the lights fell. All heads snapped to the speaker, a tall, slender guest whose mask had slipped to reveal eyes wide with terror. And though she stammered her words, each syllable rang out with the weight of accusation. She claimed to have seen the princess, still known only as the maid to many, locked in a heated exchange with Lord Percival moments before the lights died. A gasp rolled across the ballroom. Tension gripped the crowd as every mind calculated alibis, sorted motives, and recalled every whispered word exchanged since their arrival. Lady Ashcroft's cheeks blanched. Her gaze darted to the sealed doors, as though expecting them to burst open at any moment. The masked figure, ever watchful near the shadows of the staircase, shifted slightly, the movement so subtle it might have been missed by any but the most vigilant observer. Yet to Miss Marple's keen eyes, that adjustment was a confession louder than any spoken word. A red herring, she thought, or perhaps the first thread of a confession, for the princess's involvement hinted at a double life, a truth so potent it could upend every polite agreement and long-standing alliance among these nobles. The trail of wet footprints still gleamed beneath the chandelier's cold light, each step a cryptic invitation deeper into the mystery. The library doors, massive and carved with scenes of ancient hunts, stood stubbornly closed, the keyhole dark and silent. Guests shifted restlessly, their eyes flicking from the footprints to the princess, then back to Miss Marple, who stood perfectly still, mind whirring like the gears of a master clock. One man's voice rose above the murmur, a baritone sharp with rage. What motive would she have? The word motive hung in the air like a spectre. Another voice countered with hushed urgency. A legacy, perhaps. An inheritance none here knew of? Every word twisted the room tighter, as if invisible strings pulled each guest toward a final hour none could predict. As the candles shivered with each draught skimming the ballroom, Miss Marple's thoughts flicked through details like pages in a diary. The suspicious telegram delivered days before the ball, the affair whispered about in hushed corners, the heirloom known only to the royal family. Each clue layered upon the next, forming a web of deception too carefully crafted to be coincidence. And in the shifting light, the painting of Lady Evelina seemed to smirk in knowing amusement, her painted eyes tracking each suspect as if tallying who might next vanish from the ballroom's gilded safety. Miss Marple's soft voice finally rose, clear and deliberate. Mesdames et messieurs, until we know the truth, we must remain calm. Every soul here is both witness and suspect. Her words rippled outward, halting arguments mid-breath, forcing eyes to meet eyes and sowing a new, quiet dread. Outside, thunder rolled across the dark hills, the low boom echoing through Elder Manor's halls like a distant confession waiting to be heard. For now they were trapped, no one in, no one out, and every minute brought them closer to secrets exposed in the most brutal of ways. Have you ever stood among friends and strangers alike, feeling each glance weigh upon you as though every eye carried a silent accusation? At Elder Manor, that burden thickened the air until even a whisper might shatter it like glass. For as thunder rumbled beyond the fog-cloaked windows, Miss Marple's eyes narrowed, noting the subtlest betrayals. A man clutching his cuff too tightly, a lady's gloved fingers trembling at her throat, a servant's eyes darting with the desperate precision of one who knows more than he dares confess. Each unspoken word twisted the ballroom tighter into a net of suspicion. The princess, still hidden in her modest disguise, found herself at the center of a tightening circle. Guests who had toasted her presence as the charming maid now edged backward, faces pale behind ornate masks, as though her mere proximity might stain them with scandal. Lady Ashcroft's gaze darted between the princess and the locked library doors, her breathing shallow, each inhale betraying the weight of secrets she alone could name. Then came a new disturbance. A servant stumbled into the ballroom, breathless, eyes wide with terror. His voice cracked as he gasped. The footprints, they end inside the library, but the library is sealed from within. There is no way in or out. The words dropped like stones into a still pond, ripples of horror sweeping the assembled guests. Miss Marple stepped forward, voice calm, yet carrying a note of cold steel. The locked room speaks, Amias Amos. Its silence tells us what words do not, that Lord Percival's fate, and the truth behind this night, lies waiting beyond those doors. Her words pulled every face toward the library, where shadows pooled like ink beneath the intricate carvings of the great oak panels. A woman whispered near the fireplace, she argued with him. I heard it, her voice, sharp, accusing. She spoke of betrayal. The word betrayal echoed through the hall, as powerful as any confession, igniting murmurs that spread like flame. Motive swirled in every mind. Revenge for an old scandal, inheritance denied, the rage of secrets exposed. A sudden gust rattled the towering windows, extinguishing 3 candles nearest the library, plunging that end of the ballroom into a darkness thick enough to mask any movement. As shadows crept across the marbled floor, the guests pressed together, their fine gowns and tailored coats rustling like restless birds caught in a storm. Miss Marple's thoughts shifted with razor precision. She recalled the cryptic diary entry she had glimpsed in Lord Percival's study earlier that evening. Lines scrawled in haste, speaking of a scandal long buried. A clue wrapped in the words "final hour," and a warning that a violent reaction might erupt should the truth ever see the light of day. And then, cutting through the charged silence, came a voice from the far side of the ballroom. A low, deliberate tone that drew every eye. If the princess has nothing to hide, let her open the library herself. The demand hung like a blade, forcing the princess to lift her chin, eyes glinting with defiance beneath the fragile mask of a servant. Miss Marple watched each movement, each tremor of breath, knowing this moment, this final heartbeat of Chapter 2, would set the course for everything to come. For nothing in Elder Manor would remain untouched after midnight's toll. The footprints, the torn mask, and the locked room had become a stage upon which every unspoken truth must, at last, demand its audience. Chapter 3: The Shadow in the Mirror. Have you ever sensed a silence so complete that it presses against your ears, amplifying every ragged breath, every whispered speculation? For that is precisely how the ballroom of Elder Manor stood in the wake of midnight's vanishing act. Guests frozen, eyes wide, hearts pounding with the knowledge that Lord Percival had vanished without trace, and the locked room had become a riddle demanding an answer. Yet in that breathless pause, something began to change, subtle at first. A hush shifting from confusion to suspicion. Polite smiles stiffening into thin, brittle lines. Guests began whispering names, and one name rose again and again. The young maid whose bearing betrayed a royal education, whose eyes spoke of secrets far older than any uniform she wore. The whispers carried like a cold wind. Princess double life, motive. As the clock's hands crawled past midnight, mirrors lining the ballroom walls began to reflect something more than guests. Shadows rippled in corners where none stood, fleeting glimpses of a woman in black, her face hidden, drifting at the far end of candlelit corridors. Each time a guest turned to face her, there was nothing but emptiness. Yet in the mirrors, she remained, lingering with quiet defiance. Miss Marple watched the princess carefully, her gloved hands clasped too tightly, her gaze darting not just at those who stared openly, but at the reflective surfaces catching her every tremor. Nothing seemed out of place, until it suddenly was. As the princess passed one of the ornate mirrors, her reflection paused, eyes fixed directly upon her even as she continued walking, the effect so brief it could be dismissed. Yet Miss Marple did not dismiss it. From the far end of the hall came a hushed rush of footsteps, and 2 footmen burst into view, faces drained of color. They reported that every telephone in Elder Manor had gone dead simultaneously. No line would carry a voice beyond the manor's ancient walls. One man, voice quivering with fear, added that the grand gates had been found chained from the outside, thick iron links binding every exit, as though the manor itself insisted none should leave before the final hour revealed every secret. Panic simmered beneath the ballroom's forced civility. Lady Ashcroft fanned herself with frantic precision. The Baron with the scandalous past adjusted his cravat, so often it seemed an unspoken confession, and the masked figure near the staircase stepped deeper into the shadows, vanishing from sight in a manner that drew Miss Marple's eye like a lodestone. The air thickened with rumors of betrayal, of a scandal reaching across generations, of a debt long unpaid. Someone whispered of a cryptic diary entry written by Lord Percival days before, alluding to a secret pact bound in royal blood, a confession that, if spoken, could ignite a brutal rage among those who believed they had been wronged. Then, as candles flickered low, 2 maids were dispatched to the cellar to search for clues of Lord Percival's whereabouts or any clue that might reveal who had sealed the doors. They descended with lanterns held high, their eyes bright with nervous hope. Minutes stretched impossibly long. The hush deepened, but only silence returned. When at last a 3rd servant dared step down into the dark, he found only 2 masks lying side by side upon the cold stone steps, each mask dusted with fine ash, and a single note pinned between them, written in a narrow, spidery hand. The debt must be paid. The words slithered through the ballroom, igniting new fear. Miss Marple's mind tightened around each clue: the vanished servants, the chained gates, the reflection that moved with unspoken intent. There were no coincidences in Elder Manor tonight, only carefully laid threads in a tapestry of deception waiting for a deft hand to unravel them. And as lightning flashed beyond the window, illuminating every terrified face in a single cold burst, Miss Marple realized the descent had begun. The manor itself had shifted, its walls now echoing with whispered confessions and the hollow steps of those who might never walk free. Have you ever stood in a place so thick with distrust that each breath felt borrowed, each glance an accusation? For Elder Manor's ballroom had become precisely that, a chamber charged with suspicion, the polite veneer of nobility cracking beneath the weight of a vanished man, chained gates and reflections that refused to obey their owners. The princess, still wrapped in her borrowed identity, found herself the epicenter of every hushed conversation. Words like motive and betrayal spread from one masked guest to another with the quiet speed of a contagion. Eyes darted away when she looked up, yet followed her every movement with feverish intensity. Whispers rose about an affair from long ago, of a scandal hidden behind locked doors, of a legacy so tainted it could ignite a violent reaction among those who believed they had been cheated of their inheritance. It was then a tall gentleman, distinguished by a mask of deep green velvet, spoke in a voice barely above a murmur, yet heard by every ear. She has the blood of kings, yet hides among servants. What confession could be so damning it must stay buried even now? His words curled through the crowd like smoke, leaving eyes wide, lips parted in shock, and, as if summoned by that utterance, a flicker moved across the ballroom's tallest mirror. Miss Marple, ever vigilant, caught it, a shadowy figure gliding just behind the princess, its black silhouette drifting across the mirrored glass, only to vanish the instant anyone turned. Murmurs erupted. Had someone seen it too? Yet each guest denied what they thought they saw, afraid to be the first to speak of hallucinations. Lightning forked across the sky, illuminating Elder Manor in a blue-white glare that exposed every wrinkle of fear etched upon the guests' faces. Thunder followed with a rolling roar, rattling ancient portraits against the walls, and in that violent moment the ballroom's doors to the grand hallway swung inward without touch, revealing the corridor beyond empty, yet dark as the void. A second servant's voice, trembling, emerged from the back of the ballroom. The phones are dead. Even the telegraph line has been cut. We are alone. The word alone landed like a final hour bell, the realization settling over every gathered soul that they were cut off completely. No help would arrive, no escape could be had. Miss Marple stepped carefully through the press of guests, eyes narrowed, scanning every reflection for further clues. She noted mirrors in the corridor reflecting guests who had not moved. Yet in the glass, their heads turned toward the princess. She tracked the trail of reflections, finding subtle misalignments in each. A hand rising where none had moved, a figure standing still when the original guest had shifted nervously. A sudden gust of wind blew through the open ballroom doors, extinguishing candles and plunging the room into a darkness so complete it felt alive. When light returned, the guests discovered two masks lying at the ballroom threshold. One black, one ivory, positioned as though dropped in haste during flight, yet no footsteps led away across the polished marble. The masks stood as silent witnesses to a vanished presence. Another clue, twisting perception deeper into the labyrinth. Miss Marple's mind ticked with precision, pulling together each cryptic detail. The missing servants, the chained gates, the reflections behaving with mocking intent, the unspoken alibi that bound the princess to Lord Percival's fate. These threads hinted at a betrayal older than any present, a debt that demanded payment not merely from one soul, but from all bound by a shared legacy. And as the storm outside grew louder, Elder Manor itself seemed to shudder, as though the stones remembered every unspoken confession, every secret buried in the shadows of its grand halls. Have you ever felt the floor beneath your feet tilt not with movement, but with the unsettling certainty that every certainty you held moments before had turned to quicksand? For that was the quiet terror now gripping Elder Manor, as reflections defied their owners, whispers twisted friendships into rivalries, and even the grand walls themselves felt complicit in the night's escalating madness. Miss Marple moved with quiet purpose, crossing the ballroom as guests pressed back in widening arcs, their eyes darting from mirror to mirror, terrified of glimpsing that shifting shadow once more. The princess, breath unsteady yet posture resolute, stood near the base of the grand staircase, her gaze fixed on the darkened hallway beyond. Every step she took was met with suspicion. Every flicker of her eyes was measured by minds desperate for clues. The storm outside hammered the manor's ancient stones, thunder rolling across the hills in waves that rattled the crystal chandeliers. Each crash of lightning stuttered across the ballroom, revealing flashes of faces twisted with dread, mirrors momentarily reflecting scenes that made no sense, a woman kneeling in the far corner where none stood, a man's reflection stepping backward while his body remained rooted in place. And then, near the base of the grand staircase, Miss Marple's keen eye caught the glint of a key resting in the shadows. She stooped, lifting it carefully with gloved fingers, noting its ornate design, an heirloom-quality key, bearing the crest of Elder Manor itself, the kind of artifact long forgotten in dusty ledgers and cryptic diaries. As she rose, a faint sound carried from the upper gallery, a quiet, rhythmic tapping, like footsteps pacing back and forth, though the gallery itself lay empty. The guests fell silent, ears straining, eyes darting between the grand staircase and the dark hall. The tapping paused, then resumed, now accompanied by the faintest whisper, too soft to understand, yet sharp enough to slice through every frayed nerve in the room. A gentleman near the piano pressed a hand to his chest, breath hitching, as if the whispers named him directly, accusing him of an unspoken betrayal. Miss Marple's mind raced through every clue, the chained gates, the vanished servants, the cryptic note declaring, the debt must be paid, and now this key, an object of legacy that could unlock a room or a past best left sealed. She moved with quiet certainty toward the grand staircase, every step punctuated by the storm's fury outside, each flash of lightning illuminating the key's intricate crest, a clue hinting at a betrayal older than any guest gathered tonight. At the top of the stairs, she paused before Lord Percival's private study. The door stood ajar, darkness spilling across the threshold like ink. Pushing it open with careful grace, Miss Marple stepped inside, lantern held high, revealing shelves heavy with ledgers and scrolls, portraits of ancestors gazing down with imperious disapproval. And there, atop the oak desk, lay a letter sealed in crimson wax, its parchment yellowed, edges curled with age. She broke the seal, eyes scanning the elegant, spidery script. It spoke of a scandal buried centuries ago, a union between royal and common blood hidden to protect a fragile inheritance, a betrayal so deep it could unravel every bond if exposed. The letter named names, detailed motives, and hinted that Lord Percival had uncovered the truth. Truth enough to threaten legacies, ignite rage, and force desperate hands to act. As she finished reading, a gust of wind blew through the cracked window, extinguishing her lantern, plunging the study into darkness. From the mirror across the room came a fleeting reflection. Her own face staring back, but just behind it, a black silhouette leaning in close, whispering words that evaporated as quickly as they arrived. And so the descent continued, each step revealing truths twisted beyond recognition, each clue dragging Elder Manor deeper into a labyrinth of rage, legacy, and secrets exposed. For there was no turning back now. The storm outside was nothing compared to the storm brewing within these walls, and every soul trapped inside felt the truth drawing near, merciless as it was inevitable. And so, MES Amos, as Elder Manor's secrets slither from shadow to light and the storm rages above us, I invite you to share your thoughts in the comments below. Who among these guests carries the deepest motive, and what truths do you believe still lie hidden in these halls? Your theories are most welcome. Remain with us, for what waits beyond the next hour may twist every certainty you hold. Let us continue together, step by careful step, until the final clue reveals all. Chapter 4: Bloodline Curse. Have you ever felt the delicate moment when every unspoken suspicion crystallizes into certainty, when shadows that once danced harmlessly across walls gather into shapes of purpose? For it was in that very moment, as the storm's fury rattled Elder Manor's ancient timbers, that Miss Marple's mind settled upon a realization so terrible it left even her practiced heart pounding with quiet dread. She stood in Lord Percival's study, the letter still warm in her gloved hand, its words a confession whispering of a legacy woven not only into Elder Manor stones, but into the bloodline of a royal house itself. For centuries, it revealed the Manor's founders had conspired with a royal confidant, forging a secret pact to ensure power and privilege, a pact sealed by a brutal promise, that with each new royal heir, the firstborn must perish within Elder Manor's walls, so the family's influence would remain unchallenged, their line unbroken in power. Miss Marple's eyes lifted to the portraits, crowding the walls of Percival's study. There they hung, ancestors robed in velvets and silks, eyes dark and knowing, mouths set in thin lines of unspoken bargains. As lightning flashed through the tall window, their painted lips seemed to quirk, shadows curling into grim smiles of satisfaction, as if each remembered the fate paid by those who came before. She turned the letter's parchment with delicate care, tracing the timeline set down in confident script, each royal birth marked with a corresponding midnight tragedy at Elder Manor, an infant vanishing in a locked room, a young prince falling from the grand staircase on the night of his naming, a princess lost during a masked ball whose details uncannily echoed tonight's grim festivities. The pattern left no room for coincidence, only the brutal repetition of a secret that spanned centuries. Outside the study, a sharp crash echoed down the corridor. A candlestick toppled by unseen hands, the clatter drawing startled gasps from the ballroom. Guests scattered to corners, their masks slipping, revealing wide eyes and pale cheeks. Whispers surged with renewed urgency. She is the heir, the princess. She carries the inheritance and the curse. The word spread like wildfire, igniting both rage and fear. Miss Marple stepped from the study into the gallery, her mind alive with every clue gathered since the first stroke of midnight. She recalled the torn mask of Lord Percival, the vanished servants' masks left as silent warnings, the chained gates, the footprints ending in impossible locked rooms. All pieces of a puzzle pointing to one target. The princess, fated by blood to satisfy a pact older than any living soul within Elder Manor. Thunder cracked overhead with violent force, the windows rattling as if the very manor shivered with anticipation of the truth coming to light. The princess descended the grand staircase, head high despite eyes shimmering with unspoken terror, her reflection in the mirrors gliding a half-step behind her, subtly out of sync, a final confirmation that the manor itself recognized her as the key to the ancient agreement. As she reached the last step, a hush fell so absolute it pressed against every chest. A gust of wind swept through the open ballroom doors, extinguishing the last of the candelabras, plunging the hall into darkness broken only by the storm's wild flashes. And there, in that staccato of light and shadow, the portraits of Elder Manor's founders appeared to shift, their eyes gleaming with renewed malice, lips curling wider as if mocking the living for daring to challenge the pact. Nothing seemed out of place, until it suddenly was a single, ragged whisper slithered across the ballroom, as if breathed from every portrait at once. "Blood must pay for power!" The words carried the weight of centuries, binding every guest to the curse revealed in the letter Miss Marple now held in trembling hands. Have you ever known a truth so sharp it cuts the very air, turning each breath into a blade? For as the storm clawed at Elder Manor's towers, the words of that ancient pact slithered through every mind in the ballroom, sowing panic with each heartbeat. Miss Marple stepped slowly across the marble floor, the letter held aloft like a torch of revelation. Guests recoiled as she passed, their eyes darting between her steady gaze and the princess who stood trembling near the hearth, framed in the shifting light of the storm. Whispers thickened the air. This is the confession. This is the inheritance. The masked figure reappeared at the edge of the crowd, his midnight blue cloak now unmistakable as it caught flashes of lightning, his every step deliberate, footfalls silent as falling ash. His mask, pale and featureless, reflected each bolt of lightning, transforming him into a phantom who moved not with fear, but with the cold certainty of one who understood the manor's secret legacy. As Miss Marple read from the letter, her voice low yet carrying through the storm's howl, flashbacks unfurled across every terrified imagination, scenes of past tragedies layered over the present in nightmarish clarity. A young noble in powdered wig and emerald sash tumbling lifeless from the grand staircase, a swaddled infant spirited away into darkness as bells tolled for his christening, a masked lady in crimson gown slumping to the ballroom floor, her final breath stolen as music played on unknowing. Each of these lost souls had one thing in common: royal blood, and each met their fate within Elder Manor's walls at the exact moment a new heir was born. Eyes turned to the princess, her chin lifted with fragile defiance, though her hands trembled at her sides. Her face, pale as the stormlit marble, reflected in every mirror across the ballroom, yet each reflection bore a subtle difference. One with eyes downcast, one with lips curled in grief, one with tears she did not yet shed. It was as if the manor's many mirrors catalogued every possible fate, every shadow of regret, every violent reaction waiting to be unleashed. Lady Ashcroft stepped forward, her gown rustling like dry leaves, voice strained but commanding. "You knew of this, did you not? You knew the heirloom was never a gift, but a mark, proof of the pact's price." Her words lashed the room with accusation, igniting murmurs of betrayal and scandal that cracked the last of the night's fragile civility. Miss Marple's eyes scanned the portraits overhead. With every flicker of lightning, the painted ancestors' expressions shifted further, smiles twisting into grimaces, eyes gleaming with cruel satisfaction. The storm's light revealed details unseen before, fine brushstrokes suggesting hidden symbols at each ancestor's collar or ring, sigils of an unbroken promise reaching back generations. Then came a sound that turned every heart to ice. 3 slow, deliberate knocks echoing from the ballroom doors, though no one stood outside to make them. The guests gasped in unison. Heads whipped around, shadows crawled up the walls. Miss Marple's breath caught as she recognized the pattern of the knocks, identical to the rhythm marked in the diary of the manor's founder, signaling that the pact's time had come once more. The princess stumbled back a step, eyes wide, breath shuddering, as the masked figure glided forward, cloak billowing like storm-tossed waves. His voice, when it came, was a whisper sharp enough to pierce every soul gathered there. "You cannot escape your fate." Those words rang across the ballroom, reverberating in every mind like the tolling of a final hour bell. For what had begun as a night of music and masks had descended into a reckoning, one bound by blood, sealed by legacy, and hungry for the confession that would expose every secret hidden in Elder Manor's stone heart. Have you ever felt the ground shift beneath you, not with quake or tremor, but with the knowledge that the world you trusted has always rested upon a foundation of secrets? That was the sensation gripping every guest in Elder Manor as the masked figure's words, "You cannot escape your fate," hung in the air like a blade balanced on a breath. A ripple of whispers surged through the ballroom, voices tight with fear. "This is the confession we were never meant to hear. The heirloom is the proof the curse is real." Lightning flashed through the windows, illuminating faces drawn tight with horror. Thunder rolled in response, rattling the chandeliers until crystal drops rang like funeral bells. Miss Marple advanced to the princess, eyes locked on hers with a gentleness sharpened by urgency. She spoke softly but with unflinching command. "My dear, the pact was never about the manor's walls, but the blood carried in your veins. This place stands as both cradle and cage, its legacy written in every stone, every cryptic diary, every vanished soul tied to your family's name." The princess's eyes shimmered with tears, her composure cracking as the portraits overhead seemed to shift yet again. Ancestors' painted eyes now gleamed with a hunger that felt almost alive. Mouths curled with triumph at the unfolding of the fate they had set in motion generations before. As candlelight stuttered in draughts of storm winds, the smirks deepened, transforming Elder Manor's walls into a gallery of unspoken mockery. In that charged silence, the masked figure lifted a gloved hand, revealing an object gleaming faintly, a pendant unmistakable in its royal craftsmanship, the heirloom itself, its design matching that worn by monarchs for centuries. He held it aloft, as if presenting it to the storm, voice a low hiss that carried across the room. "This is the mark of inheritance, the symbol of the curse. It binds you more surely than chains." Guests pressed back in horror. Some clutched pearls or cufflinks. Others whispered prayers they had not uttered since childhood. Rage and panic intertwined. Someone cried out accusations of treachery. Another demanded an explanation for every death lost to the manor's midnight tolls. The very air buzzed with unspoken rage, each heartbeat thick with the threat of violent reaction. Miss Marple's eyes darted to the letter she still gripped, its parchment now damp in her hand. A clue within the final paragraph glowed with terrible clarity. References to a betrayal so ancient it had been reduced to myth. Yet here it stood proven, alive, hungry for fulfillment. It described how the firstborn's loss must occur within Elder Manor itself, or the family's claim to power would crumble like rotted stone. The storm roared outside, lightning flashing strobe-like through the ballroom, each burst catching the masked figure's cloaks swirling, the princess's tears glittering, and the guests' terrified faces frozen in tableau. And there, in those flashes, the portraits appeared to lean closer, as if savoring every ripple of dread washing through the hall. Miss Marple took a single, decisive step forward, voice low but resonant enough to silence every tremor of whispered speculation. "This pact ends tonight, one way or another. The truth is a blade, and Elder Manor has been sharpened by centuries of secrets. But know this, Amias Amos, the legacy you fear need not end in another lost life, if we dare to face the truth before the final hour strikes." And so the chapter closed upon a ballroom crackling with rage, haunted by whispered curses and bound to a confession that threatened to expose every bond of blood and betrayal Elder Manor had ever harbored. For the night was far from over, and the reckoning had only just begun. Chapter 5. The House Turns Against Them. Have you ever heard silence fracture like glass, the calm of a moment splintering into chaos, so complete it seems the very walls conspire in the descent? For as the masked figure's final words still hung in the charged air, you cannot escape your fate. A sudden, deafening bang rattled Elder Manor to its bones, shaking portraits, rattling crystal, and sending guests stumbling. Nothing seemed out of place, until it suddenly was. Doors all along the grand corridor slammed shut of their own accord, one after the next in quick, brutal succession, the thunderous cracks echoing like gunfire through the cavernous halls. Each door's violent closure sent fresh waves of panic through the guests, forcing them to scatter, their silks and satins blurring as they fled. Miss Marple, steady even as the floor seemed to shift beneath her, scanned every movement, her mind cataloging details like a jeweler sorting diamonds. Shadows twisted along the walls, candlelight flickering violently as drafts skirled under doors and across the ballroom's polished marble. The windows, tall and arched, groaned with each gust of storm wind, until, with a shuddering roar, one window shattered inward, shards raining down like a shower of frozen stars, scattering guests into shrieking confusion. Murmurs of a ghostly force rose from every corner. This is the locked room curse. It wants the air. The house itself is alive. The words became a chorus of terror, eroding reason as each new slam of a door and crash of glass fed the panic. Then, in the chaos, a scream split the thunder. A guest near the east wing was pulled into the shadows by an unseen force. His mask tumbled across the marble floor, spinning to a stop near Miss Marple's feet, its surface smeared with something dark. Yet no footsteps led away. No sign of struggle marred the floor beyond that single, accusing clue. Lightning flashed overhead, revealing glimpses of figures darting between rooms. Yet whether they were guests driven mad by fear or something else entirely, no one could say. Cries rose of betrayal. You did this! Your family's curse. Confess. The princess, eyes wide, backed up the grand staircase, skirts clutched in shaking hands, gaze flicking wildly between mirrors that now reflected fractured images of the ballroom. One moment filled with guests, the next empty, as if time itself staggered between breaths. Miss Marple stepped through the cacophony, her voice calm, words biting through the roar. Remain together! Panic is the greatest weapon of the unknown. Yet even as she spoke, the grand chandelier overhead began to sway wildly, its crystals tinkling like funeral bells, casting slashing shadows across portraits that now looked almost alive with flickers of rage and unspoken secrets. A door to the library burst open on its own, slamming into the stone wall with force enough to crack the frame. A gust of wind whooshed through, scattering pages of ancient diaries into the ballroom, each sheet fluttering like desperate birds, bearing lines of confession, cryptic references to past heirs, whispered promises of revenge, and a final hour yet to come. And from the storm's howl came a voice so faint it might have been the wind, yet every guest heard it unmistakably. One must fall! For a single, breathless moment, all movement halted. Faces turned toward the grand staircase, eyes drawn inexorably upward, hearts pounding with the certain knowledge that Elder Manor's night had slipped beyond their control, that the walls themselves now conspired to feed an ancient legacy that had waited far too long to be fulfilled. Have you ever stood in a place so charged with dread that each heartbeat rang louder than the storm, each breath a gamble against the chaos crashing around you? For Elder Manor now roared like a beast awakened, the storm outside a mere echo of the fury rattling its walls. As guests stumbled for cover, doors slammed shut behind them with a finality that smothered every plea. Window after window burst inward, gusts driving rain and shards of glass across the ballroom. Thunder crackled overhead like a mocking laugh. Through it all, Miss Marple moved like a ghost herself, eyes scanning each slamming door, every shifting shadow, each trembling face. From the mezzanine came a cry of terror. Head snapped upward just as the grand staircase shuddered. The ancient timbers groaned, cracking with a tortured wail, before the middle section of the stairs collapsed, spilling splinters, marble balusters, and shrieking guests into a tangled heap. Dust rose in choking clouds. The staircase now lay in ruin, cutting off any descent from the upper halls. Survivors trapped above pounded on banisters, their pale faces peering down with desperate rage. In the ballroom below, figures moved in jerky bursts, eyes wide with panic. Some lunged at shadows, convinced they were the cause of the night's unraveling. One woman clutched a candelabrum, swinging it wildly when footsteps approached. Another gentleman turned on his closest companion, shrieking accusations of betrayal and a secret alliance with the princess. Each violent reaction fed the storm's madness, driving them to savage each other as much as they feared whatever unseen hand might be picking them off. A sudden hush swept the room, as if even the storm paused to draw breath. Lightning arced, bathing the ballroom in a ghastly white glare, revealing a tableau that struck every soul motionless. At the far end of the hall, Lord Percival's body stood propped grotesquely against a massive fireplace. His limbs dangled at twisted angles, head cocked unnaturally, eyes staring glassy and unseeing into the crowd. His mask, ripped and hanging from one ear, framed a face frozen in eternal horror. Pinned to his chest, fluttering in the storm's gust, was a note scrawled in dark ink. One must fall. Gasps rose like a wave. Some fell to their knees. Others backed away until their spines pressed against cold marble walls. Miss Marple alone stepped forward, face ashen yet set with steely determination. Her mind sifted each clue with merciless precision. The vanished heirloom, the cryptic diary entries, the footprints ending at locked rooms, the confession of an ancient pact, and now the grotesque display of Lord Percival's corpse, each piece converging on a single, dreadful conclusion. A mirror near the ballroom doors reflected the chaos in jagged, shifting images. But as Miss Marple passed, she halted, heart hammering. There, in the wavering glass, stood her own reflection. Yet it moved a moment behind her step, eyes glittering with a subtle malice she knew was not her own. As she stared, the reflection smiled faintly and then stepped back into the shadows, vanishing like mist in the dawn. The walls of Elder Manor seemed to breathe then, a low groan rumbling through beams and stones, as if the house itself savored the secrets finally exposed. Every guest felt it. The ancient curse had slipped free of whisper and rumor, rising now as a living force, hungry for the final hour's confession. Have you ever felt that a place itself hungered for your secrets? That every timber, every stone, every shifting shadow watched with silent intent? For in Elder Manor, the walls now felt alive with purpose, exhaling gusts of cold air that snuffed out candles and sent tapestries flapping like the wings of caged birds. In the wake of Lord Percival's grisly display, the ballroom descended into a fragile, trembling silence. Guests, disheveled and wild-eyed, clustered in desperate knots. Whispers darted from mouth to ear. It must be the heir's blood. No one leaves until it's paid. She cannot escape. Each word carried a fresh crackle of fear, stoking rage in some, hopelessness in others. Lightning flared, revealing streaks of rain that ran like tears down the tall windows. Thunder rolled so close it rattled the marble underfoot. The portraits overhead seemed to shift in the strobing light, faces contorting with faint, malicious glee, lips curled in cruel satisfaction at the chaos they presided over. The heirloom key Miss Marple had found earlier glinted at her belt, a reminder of the twisted legacy winding itself ever tighter around the princess's fate. The masked figure appeared again near the shattered staircase, movements fluid as drifting smoke, cloak swirling with each silent step. He raised his head slowly, mask reflecting the wild flickers of candlelight, and though his face remained hidden, his presence radiated an icy authority that froze every word on every tongue. In a voice that whispered like steel across stone, he declared, "The house knows who must pay." At once, doors slammed open and shut along the corridor beyond, each violent crack echoing like a heartbeat counting down. Shadows flitted across thresholds, too tall, too slender, too quick to belong to any guest. In the mirror nearest Miss Marple, reflections splintered. The ballroom split into impossible scenes of dozens of guests, some frozen mid-scream, others staring straight into their own eyes. A fresh gust swept the room. Candles toppled. The chandeliers above swung, so wildly they flung shards of crystal to the floor. Cries rose as feet slipped on the polished marble. A gentleman fell with a sickening thud, his mask skidding into darkness. Yet when guests peered at him moments later, he was gone, vanished as if the manor itself had swallowed him whole. Amid the chaos, Miss Marple's gaze locked onto the grand mirror opposite the ballroom doors. Her reflection stood unnaturally still, eyes dark and unblinking. Then it lifted one hand in deliberate mockery, an exact mirror of her own, gesture delayed by a heartbeat, before stepping backward into the shimmering glass, fading from sight as though it had never been there at all. The room convulsed with gasps, hands clutched pearls, eyes darted wildly. Accusations flew in ragged shrieks. Every guest now doubted their own senses, certain that either the manor's curse had come alive or madness had infected them all. Miss Marple steadied herself with slow, measured breaths, mind turning over every clue. Lord Percival's confession, the ancient pact, the cryptic diaries, the heirloom key, the bloody note, each piece fitting tighter with a brutal logic. Yet even she felt the fragile edge of reason slipping as thunder roared like a final warning. For Elder Manor was no longer simply a grand estate filled with masks and music. It had become a labyrinth of rage, betrayal, and secrets exposed, its halls twisting in on themselves with every beat of the storm. And somewhere in its dark heart the answer waited, promising a reckoning none would escape unscathed. Chapter 6. The Final Confrontation. Have you ever stood upon the precipice of truth, knowing that with a single word, the careful facade of every secret would shatter, spilling betrayals so old they carried the dust of centuries? That was the hush that settled over Elder Manor as the guests gathered, breathless, desperate, within the ballroom's splintered walls, their eyes fixed upon Miss Marple as she stepped forward to reveal the final, brutal confession the night had demanded. Doors hung from twisted hinges. Mirrors stood cracked in spiderweb patterns. The chandeliers above swayed with ominous grace. The storm still battered the manor stones, thunder rolling in time with the rattling hearts of all trapped within. Shadows crept up the marble walls like silent sentinels. Miss Marple's voice, cool as a midnight breeze, broke the silence. This night was no accident. It was designed, each step, each terror, crafted by one who knew every secret Elder Manor holds. Gasps rippled through the crowd, eyes darting between neighbors, friends, and family, all now suspects, all trembling under the weight of the confession taking form. She turned her gaze upon the manor's caretaker, a stooped man in livery, so dark it seemed to swallow the flickering candlelight. His eyes, small and hooded, glistened as though they had waited lifetimes for this moment. Miss Marple's words rang out with unflinching certainty. It was you who set this night in motion. You who ensured doors slammed, windows shattered, and terror spread like wildfire. You who upheld the pact your ancestor forged. A chorus of horrified whispers swept the ballroom. The caretaker! But why? What could he gain? Is he the only one? Each word a knife twisting deeper into the manor's ragged heart. The caretaker's face twisted in a mask of rage and triumph. His voice rose, harsh, cracking, but clear enough to carry over the storm. My family was sworn to protect this house's legacy. Generations of us have guided the curse, ensuring the royal line pays its debt. But you are fools if you think I alone could shape such horrors. Guests staggered back as the air in the ballroom thickened, shadows along the walls stretching higher until they touched the carved ceiling, undulating like waves of black silk. The portraits of Elder Manor's founders appeared almost to writhe, their eyes gleaming with cruel amusement, mouths twisting with unspoken confessions that dared every soul to watch. Miss Marple stepped closer, eyes locked upon the caretaker's, her words slicing the rising panic. You claim the house itself demands payment, but who gave it voice? Who kept the pact alive? Her question cut through the storm, through the rattling chandeliers, through the roar of wind pounding the manor's stone walls. The caretaker's breath hitched. His hands twitched violently at his sides. His eyes rolled upward, voice cracking in a final, strangled shout. It is not me. Something commands me, something that lives in these walls. His arms jerked upward as if seized by invisible chains, hands clutching at his own throat, eyes bulging with terror. His body stiffened, convulsed, and with a sickening crack his head fell forward, silence slamming down upon the ballroom like a coffin lid. For a moment no one dared move. Guests stared with frozen horror at the man's lifeless form, swaying in the gloom. Then a low, rolling groan emanated from the manor's very foundations, as if the house itself exhaled a breath of rage. The shadows along the walls gathered, pooling like ink, crawling higher until they swallowed the ceiling's ornate moldings. Lightning split the sky, searing through the ballroom windows, igniting the ancient painting of Lady Evelina, first introduced on this fateful night, sending flames licking across her smirking face. Firelight danced wildly upon portraits, consuming gilt frames and washing the room in feverish orange. And in that instant, above the crackling of fire, came the faintest whisper, threading through every guest's ear. The blood must be royal! Every head turned to the princess, standing pale and trembling amid swirling smoke, eyes wide with the certainty that the final hour had come, and the manor would not release its hold until the last secret was paid in full. Have you ever seen a room where time itself feels paused, every heart arrested by the certainty that one breath, one word, could ignite a storm no soul would escape? For Elder Manor's ballroom now held just such a silence, heavy as the air before lightning strikes, suffocating as every gaze swung to the princess standing alone amid the smoke and flame. The storm's fury beyond the shattered windows was now rivaled by the fire spreading across the massive portrait of Lady Evelina. Her painted eyes, once glinting with subtle malice, now flared orange in the dancing light, flames curling across her smirking mouth until the canvas split with a searing pop. Sparks drifted to the marble below like dying stars, setting small fires in the tattered remnants of rich drapes. Every guest, noble and servant alike, pressed back against cracked walls, eyes wild with terror. Their whispers rose in panicked bursts. She must pay. The pact is not yet fulfilled. The house will never let us leave. The words ricocheted off stone, feeding fear until it roared louder than the storm. Miss Marple alone moved with a quiet, determined grace, her eyes fixed on each face, reading every flicker of guilt, each shiver of dread. She recalled the diary pages, the cryptic telegrams, the heirloom key, and now the caretaker's final, desperate confession. Each clue wove together into a tapestry of motives layered deeper than any had guessed. The manor's true master was not flesh and blood, but a legacy grown so twisted it had become a prison for every soul bound by its secrets. The masked figure stepped into the spreading light of the burning portrait, cloak stirring as though moved by an unfelt breeze. His voice cut through the rising panic with cold precision. None here can leave until the pact is paid. The house knows the blood it demands. His mask gleamed with reflected fire, eyes hidden, yet alive with unspoken certainty. A door at the far end of the ballroom burst open without touch, banging so hard it splintered the wood. Cold night air rushed in, swirling ash and smoke, carrying with it a whisper that rose above the crackle of flames. The firstborn, the final hour, the words curled around every ear like a snake, leaving gasps in their wake. Portraits rattled on their hooks, mirrors shivered in their gilt frames, reflections rippling unnaturally. Guests staggered, eyes catching glimpses of themselves twisted, screaming silently or staring with murderous calm. Visions that lasted mere heartbeats but tore sanity like thin paper. A violent reaction broke among the crowd. A man in a feathered mask lunged for the princess, eyes wide with terror and rage. But Miss Marple intercepted him with surprising strength, voice cracking like a whip. No more! The pact is a lie born of greed and power. We must break it with truth, not blood. Her words struck the room like a bell, freezing the would-be attacker mid-lunge, shaking others from their fevered panic. But before relief could settle, shadows poured from the cracks between stones, crawling up walls, pooling beneath feet, swirling together as if drawn by a single, hungry will. The flames reached higher, smoke spiraling to the ceiling beams as the manor groaned with the weight of its own centuries-old vengeance. And at the center of it all, the princess swayed where she stood, eyes rolling back, lips parting in a silent gasp as the flames illuminated her pale face. Her knees buckled, her body slumped forward. A collective cry of horror erupted as she collapsed onto the marble floor, arms splaying wide as whispers filled the ballroom, cold and countless as falling snow. The blood must be royal! Every heart in the ballroom knew in that instant that the final hour had arrived, and Elder Manor would not rest until its last, brutal demand was answered. Have you ever felt a moment stretch so thin it feels ready to snap, a single instant holding the fate of every soul suspended upon a blade's edge? For that was the hush gripping Elder Manor's ballroom as the princess lay motionless on the marble floor, her chest rising in shallow, ragged breaths, eyes fluttering beneath, lids gone pale as ghostlight. The flames crackled higher on the portrait above, now reduced to blackened canvas and leering embers. Smoke coiled around the grand chandelier, which swayed dangerously overhead, chains creaking in protest as sparks drifted like ominous snowflakes. Guests shrank back, their once grand finery reduced to tattered silks, masks hanging from limp fingers, eyes wide with the knowledge that centuries of betrayal and greed had led them here, to this one breathless pause before either truth or terror claimed them all. Some clutched at each other, eyes darting between the unconscious princess and Miss Marple, desperate for guidance. Others stood frozen, lips working soundlessly as if praying to an inheritance that had become their curse. Miss Marple knelt by the princess, eyes fierce, voice low and certain as she spoke to the gathered crowd. This is the last illusion the manor holds over you. The pact has no power if we refuse to feed it our fear. Her words struck the silence like a stone cast into still water, rippling through hearts gripped by generations of whispered curses. A fresh wave of rage surged among the guests. Arguments flared into shouts. Accusations split the smoky air. She's the heir. She must pay. You lied about your alibi. The telegram warned us. The storm beyond the manor's walls shrieked as thunder crashed, shaking the foundations, sending ripples through the marble floor like the manor itself roared in agreement. Then, from the shadows near the cracked ballroom doors, the masked figure emerged once more. His cloak billowed, eyes hidden behind his pale mask. His voice rose above the din, unearthly calm. I have served the pact for generations. I watched each heir fall, but tonight you have all broken its command by knowing its truth. His words hung in the air, heavy as stone, striking every heart with the finality of a confession none could unhear. Suddenly, a gust of icy wind howled through the ballroom, whipping the flames sideways, shadows skittering across walls. The portraits rattled in unison, and every mirror across the vast hall shimmered with rippling reflections. Dozens of guests seen from impossible angles, some moving with moments of delay, others frozen in silent screams. The ground shuddered. Marble cracked beneath the princess's prone form. Faint lines of light pulsed through the fissures like veins of molten gold, racing outward in intricate patterns across the floor, tracing the shapes of old sigils long hidden beneath the manor's polished stone. Miss Marple rose to her full height, eyes blazing as she turned on the crowd. "Listen to me. This is the final hour the diaries spoke of. The manor's rage has been fed by your fear. But if we stand together, refuse its ancient demand, the pact will die with this night." Her words collided with a chorus of whispers, slipping from every crack and corner of Elder Manor. "The blood must be royal! The blood must be royal!" Lightning burst outside with a roar, throwing every reflection into sharp relief one last time. The masked figure stepped into the light, cloak streaming like ink, his voice low and cold. "Then pay it, or all shall vanish." And so the final confrontation stood poised upon the razor's edge of dawn and despair, every life hanging upon the next breath, every secret exposed, every soul waiting to see whether the manor's hunger would at last be satisfied or broken forever. And so, Amias Amos, as Elder Manor's walls close in and the final hour looms, I invite you to share your thoughts below. Will the pact claim its royal price, or can truth break the chain of inheritance? Your theories may yet reveal the final twist. If you've found yourself captivated by these shadows and secrets, do consider subscribing now, so you do not miss the conclusion of this mystery, where every clue shall find its purpose and every question its answer. Chapter 7. The True Curse. Have you ever watched dawn arrive only to find its light brings no warmth, no comfort, but instead reveals a world more twisted than the darkest night? That was the dreadful hush clinging to Elder Manor as the first pale rays of morning spilled through shattered windows, illuminating the ruins of the ballroom with a light so thin it seemed to wash every color into ash. Guests stood or slumped where exhaustion pinned them, silks torn, eyes hollow, faces drawn into masks of disbelief. They watched with ragged breaths as the storm clouds parted, revealing a sky the color of bruised pearl. Yet, even as the winds calmed, Elder Manor's doors remained sealed. Every attempt to wrench them open met only unyielding resistance, as though the manor itself had slipped loose from the world beyond. Miss Marple, her hair disheveled yet eyes sharp as ever, paced the ballroom's fractured marble, mind turning over every clue, the vanished telegrams, the brutal confessions, the shifting reflections. Every detail pointed to a single, terrible truth, that the manor existed not merely in place, but in a time of its own choosing, a prison repeating its ancient demand until it was fed. The survivors shivered as whispers drifted from shadowed corners, faint, cold, carrying words that brushed every ear with the finality of an unspoken curse. The firstborn, the final hour, unfinished. A sudden gasp broke the silence. Princess Seraphina stirred on the marble, her eyes fluttering open. For a fleeting instant, those eyes reflected not fear or confusion, but pools of midnight black, empty, cold, as if something far older than the princess herself peered from within. Miss Marple's breath caught in her throat, the image searing itself into her memory. But when she blinked, the princess's eyes were her own once more, bright with tears, wild with terror. Was it a trick of light, a phantom conjured by exhaustion, or the final clue that the pact had seeped so deeply into royal blood it had awakened something never meant to stir? As Seraphina pushed herself upright, the ballroom shifted around her. Floorboards groaned beneath her feet as if recognizing her presence. Paintings that had watched the night unfold now hung straight, their surfaces unscarred by flame or smoke. Drapes swayed gently in a breeze that smelled of roses, not the acrid bite of charred wood, and when Seraphina touched the nearest chair, it stood polished and whole, the very seat that had splintered hours before under the weight of fleeing guests. Miss Marple stepped back, eyes narrowing as the truth unspooled. The manor was resetting itself, wiping away every trace of the night's horrors, even as the final echoes of whispered curses still hung in the air. Guests near the ballroom doors gasped as they turned, finding the entrance wide open to the morning sun, as if inviting them to leave, yet the air beyond shimmered strangely, like a reflection glimpsed in a warped mirror. A butler, his uniform pristine, appeared from the corridor, announcing with polite precision, "The carriages have arrived for your departure. Ladies and gentlemen, breakfast shall be served shortly." His voice carried the casual warmth of any ordinary dawn, but in the eyes of every survivor, only raw terror stared back. For the ballroom itself stood restored, chandeliers gleaming, mirrors spotless, every mask returned to its hook upon the wall. Guests began drifting toward the doors in a daze, some laughing too shrilly, others sobbing quietly, each one glancing behind them at the grand hall that moments ago had threatened to consume them whole. Miss Marple lingered by the threshold, heart pounding, mind awhirl with questions no diary, telegram, or confession could answer. Had they survived, or merely become part of the manor's endless cycle? Have you ever stepped from a nightmare only to realize you are still dreaming, that every detail of safety you grasp dissolves beneath your fingers like morning mist? For that was the dreadful certainty gripping the survivors of Elder Manor as they stumbled from the ballroom, their hearts pounding with a hope they dared not trust. The corridor beyond greeted them in impossible perfection. Carpets unsoiled, sconces gleaming with steady candlelight, portraits straightened and smiling serenely as if they had not twisted in rage mere hours before. Footsteps echoed softly on polished floors, each measured step clashing with the memories of slamming doors and vanished companions still vivid in every trembling mind. Princess Seraphina, her gown somehow restored to silk purity, stepped carefully into the corridor. The hem of her dress brushed marble smooth as glass, unmarked by soot or blood. Her eyes darted to every mirror, catching glimpses of herself that shifted with unnatural hesitation, each reflection showing a Seraphina a heartbeat behind, as if the manor's halls stuttered in time itself. Miss Marple's gaze swept the walls, mind dissecting each clue with ruthless precision. The telegrams had vanished, the cryptic diary pages were nowhere to be found. The heirloom key she had held tight throughout the long night was gone, pockets empty, hands strangely clean. Guests began murmuring in hushed, broken voices. Was it all a dream? Did we imagine it? How can everything be perfect? Their confusion spread like poison, shaking resolve, loosening the fragile grip on the horrors they had survived. Yet, as they stepped closer to the manor's grand entrance, a sight froze them in place. Through the tall doors, daylight streamed bright and soft. Yet beyond the threshold, the gardens did not match the dawn's promise. The hedges stood shrouded in fog so dense it felt alive, curling in slow, deliberate motions like something breathing in the mist. Figures loomed within it, tall and indistinct, appearing for a breath before dissolving again. Miss Marple's breath came shallow and sharp, her eyes locked on Seraphina, who paused with one hand upon the brass handle of the great door. For an instant, the princess's eyes flicked black again, deeper than midnight, reflecting not terror, but a cold, ancient knowledge that turned Marple's blood to ice. Yet when she blinked, those eyes returned to their familiar brightness, brimming with confusion and tears. A soft chorus of whispers unfurled from every darkened corner of the corridor, rising in a sibilant wave that carried a single, dreadful refrain. The blood must be royal. The final hour is never done. The words slithered into every ear, igniting fresh horror in every heart. Guests reeled backward, some covering their ears, others clutching each other in frantic denial. Then, as if on cue, doors behind them clicked shut with gentle finality. The walls seemed to exhale a long, cold sigh, shadows creeping across the ornate floor patterns as the manor settled into a silence so absolute it rang like a bell. Miss Marple's eyes narrowed. Her voice rose, low but clear. "No, we are not free. We are part of something that feeds upon fear, upon rage, upon secrets exposed. And it will not release us simply because the night has ended." Her words hung heavy, unchallenged, each syllable striking the survivors like hammer blows as they faced the truth they wished to deny. Because dawn had come, but Elder Manor remained unchanged, suspended between darkness and light, the final hour ticking onward, unseen, unending. Have you ever crossed the threshold of survival only to realize the true terror waits beyond, that what you escaped was merely the beginning of something far deeper, far more impossible? For that was the truth settling like lead upon every heart as the survivors of Elder Manor stepped into the bright dawn, only to find the morning air thick with a silence more unnatural than any midnight scream. The grand doors stood open upon a world both familiar and alien. Sunlight bathed the manor's gravel drive. Carriages waited in patient rows, and footmen stood with gloved hands folded, eyes lowered respectfully. Yet the air shimmered faintly, a distortion as though heat rose from stones on a summer road, though the breeze upon their cheeks carried a damp chill. Guests descended the steps hesitantly, heads turning, eyes wide, as they found themselves passing gardeners trimming hedges with serene precision, maids in spotless uniforms sweeping already clean pathways. Each face they passed wore calm, polite smiles, yet their eyes held nothing, reflecting no recognition of the night's horrors, as if the very staff had been replaced with hollow facades. Miss Marple paused at the foot of the steps, her gaze locked upon the grand ballroom's tall windows. There, beyond the reflecting glass, the ballroom appeared unblemished. Chandeliers gleaming, mirrors intact, floors flawless, guests in pristine masks and silks, drifting in pairs as though the night had never fallen to chaos. Music floated faintly, a waltz so soft it barely brushed the ear. Then her breath caught, for high in the grand window, framed by velvet drapes, stood a woman identical to herself, perfectly matching every line of her face, every wave of silver hair, every gleam of calculation in her sharp eyes. The double watched from within, still as marble, lips curled faintly in a knowing smile. And as Miss Marple stared, that reflection lifted one hand in a slow, deliberate wave before stepping back into the ballroom's shifting shadows, vanishing as if it had never been. A cold shudder rippled through her bones. She spun on her heel, eyes sweeping the garden where the other survivors now stumbled toward waiting carriages. Their voices rose in low, desperate arguments. "We must leave. Did we ever really arrive? Will we remember any of this?" Their panic fed the dawn's brittle quiet, each word falling into air that swallowed sound like a grave. Princess Seraphina, eyes flicking with lingering shadows, leaned heavily against a carriage door. For a moment, she locked eyes with Miss Marple, a question burning in their depths. "Are we free?" But before the words could pass her lips, the wind picked up, scattering her voice into the drifting fog curling around the manor's gates. Miss Marple turned once more to Elder Manor's ancient stones, knowing they held a truth she could not unearth with clues alone. Her thoughts churned with every clue: vanished diaries, cryptic telegrams, the caretaker's confession, shadows moving of their own accord, reflections that did not obey. And above all, the certainty that Elder Manor existed beyond the reach of clocks and calendars, a prison of inheritance waiting for the next final hour. As dawn's light climbed higher, bathing the manor in a glow that felt both beautiful and hollow, Miss Marple stepped into her waiting carriage. Yet, even as hooves clattered against the stones, she could not help but glance back once more, eyes tracing the ballroom's grand window, knowing somewhere within, her own reflection watched her leave. For in Elder Manor, nothing had truly ended. The night's horrors had merely been folded back into the manor's timeless facade, waiting for new guests, new secrets, new blood. And so, dear friends, the question hangs in the mist. Who among them truly survived, and who remains forever within Elder Manor's grasp? And so, MES Amos, as Elder Manor stands silent once more, waiting for its next masquerade of secrets, we leave you with but one question. Who do you believe truly survived this night, and who never left at all? Share your theories in the comments below. If this tale has drawn you into its shadows, consider subscribing now, so you may join us for our next mystery, and together we shall follow every whispered clue to its final, breathtaking hour.